And I was like, so do you want to have Alzheimer's when you're 90 or not? And he kind of like looked at me like, what? And I was like, because this is not compatible. And that's kind of the hardest thing is there's this misconception that I can do anything in my life and I should be able to then just like switch to being able to go to sleep and, have like an immediate like turn off like you would a computer or a light switch. And that's not how humans work.
Hey, welcome back to the show, to the Valor Vision Podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion today with Dr. Benjamin Long as he joins us today. He's a sleep study guy, and man, I'm not only that, but you're in school, and you're marrying these things together, and so I'm really looking forward to this. But first and foremost, make sure that you subscribe and hit the like button and all those kinds of good things on here as well. But let's give a bio for Dr. Benjamin Long before we just let him run away with the show, as we typically do with our guests on here. But Dr. Benjamin Long is a dual board certified sleep physician and pediatrician based out of San Antonio, Texas. By day, he cares for patients as a sleep doctor, and by night, he's a seminary student with a deep interest in the integration of theology and medicine, especially when it comes to sleeping. Dr. Long has a long and unique passion for helping people see sleep not only as a medical necessity, but also as a gift from God. His work lives at the intersection of science and faith, where he thoughtfully explores how biblical truth and sound sleep practices can work together to bring peace to restless nights. This calling inspired his debut book, Sleep Habits Journal, right here. And so thank you so much for sending this out to me. I've really enjoyed this so far. It's the practices and prayers to ease your sleepless nights and devotions in here, which there's some really insightful ones that I was reading I absolutely loved. And so in that he blends biblical reflections, guided prayers, and journaling prompts with proven tools from sleep medicine to help calm anxious hearts and invite God's presence into the experience of sleeplessness. He lives with his wife, his son, and of course their dog, Rollo. And so we're really happy to have you. Welcome on, Dr. Long. How are we doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get into it. But first and foremost, I always like asking this question because I think this is such a big deal, is who is Dr. Long without the PhD and all of that kind of stuff? How were you raised? What brought you into the curiosity of medicine and then sleep being even more that specific thing? What was your childhood like and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, we were poor. That sums it up in one word.
We were poor.
Poor.
What a way to start it out. But there you go.
That couldn't afford the OR kind of. My dad was a preacher, so I grew up a preacher's kid. And, he did not have a great paycheck. So I remember growing up, being at Burger King and having a communal cup to share amongst the whole family kind of a thing. So I think in one way that because of that lack of resources, I think oftentimes I wasn't in any kind of daycare or after school things. And so oftentimes if the church doors were open, we were there. Or if my dad was visiting someone in the hospital or going to a funeral home or something of that nature, then I was oftentimes, me and my siblings were with him. So I think from a very young age, I pretty quickly saw the brokenness of the world around me, but as well as parts of life like hospitals and funeral homes that most, people don't get a lot of exposure to even as adults. So I think from a very young age, an idea of being a helper, being a minister. And then my grandfather was a pediatrician. So I like to tell people, I kind of just squished my grandfather and my dad together for my career goals. And that's really what I think has propelled me on my path, just becoming a physician, but also really influenced my curiosity to study the Bible when it comes to medicine and sleep.
Was there anything specific? I think, we say this a lot in the church, just because you were born in the church, and especially as a pastor's kid, doesn't mean that you're a Christian. What was that said, okay, what my dad was preaching, he's right, and I believe it now? and I believe it for myself kind of thing.
Yeah. You say that, it brings to mind, I had this like teacher in high school that I said I was a preacher's kid, and she just randomly was like, my first alcoholic drink was with a preacher's kid. And I was like, that's a weird thing to say to a teenager, but okay. But exactly, like PKs have that reputation for a reason. You kind of have like the one that goes, the one that stays. And yeah, I think, I committed my life to Jesus from a very young age. I was like 5 or 6. And I think there's a blessing in that. Um, just the repetition of the word being preached and hearing that, and just so regularly every single week. But at the same time, I think I personally had lots of doubts. There's this conversation around once saved, always saved. And like, do you know that you know that you know that you know? And I was like, no, I don't know. So that was something I definitely like struggled with growing up. Uh, but I never really came to a place where I had such significant doubts that it just shook my foundations to go off on a kind of deconstruction journey like we see with a lot of people kind of nowadays.
Mhm.
There are certainly parts of the faith tradition I was a part of, and I grew up Southern Baptist, that as I have gotten older, I, have tried to look at and say, like, okay, that's, Christianity. It wasn't like the apostles and then we had the Southern Baptists immediately in the first century right afterwards.
Yeah,
Like
no.
Christianity didn't start with that. So, and that's something I'm even learning now in seminary, of learning about church history and about all of these people in the past and what they have, how they have interpreted the Bible, and the story and history of how that has kind of progressed. So, all that to say, I never had a moment where I was wanted to walk away from the church.
Mhm.
I definitely had doubts where I was like, is all of this real?
Mhm.
Is, like, are we just like making this up kind of a thing? And so I feel like I'm real fortunate that I had space to like ask those questions and to talk about that amongst just with my family and my church and the different groups that I found myself in. Cause I feel like that's often a narrative of like not being able to ask questions. And I never really found myself in that situation. I was always able to ask those questions.
That's good. I think that that kind of touches on a healthy upbringing, especially when it comes to faith, is being able to ask questions and not shying away, and not shying away from the hard ones.
Yeah.
I think that that's one of the things that non-believers love to point at people for, is you're scared of talking about the hard questions. And it's like, no, we need to talk about the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And you bring a unique perspective with talking about, faith and science and medical science, specifically coming together and showing how they actually harmonize versus they're not, antithetical to each other or whatever, like, against one another. Good science actually points to the creator of it, of everything. So,
And really, like the root of modern hospitals was Christianity. Like Christians
mhm,
were the first ones who, because of how we have viewed the other, and especially out of, Jesus's parables, like the Good Samaritan was a big one that inspired early Christians to say, I need to very tangibly care for the stranger, which led to what we know as hospitals today.
that's awesome. Yeah. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that, but I think more modern hospitals are getting away from some of the naming conventions that was very theological, right? Saint Mary's and Saint
Hmm.
this and all of that kind of stuff with hospitals. And now, more modern ones are having more of a secular name, but that's where a lot of that comes from. Where did this marrying these two come together? So you were a doctor first, you jumped into pediatrician and also sleep
Hmm.
and all of that kind of medicine. And then what drove you to say, you know what? I'm going to add on to this and go to, seminary now.
Yeah. I it's a question I'm also asking myself. How did I get here? A lot of it really is curiosity and the Bible nerd in me and just wanting to continue to learn. I definitely am one of those people that it's like I'm not confident in something until I have a degree or some kind of like certification behind it. But the biggest thing, I think, one was my own journey of integrating myself as a physician and a Christian. And I came into medicine. I remember thinking of like, okay, well, what is my purpose? Like to at the time when I just imagined that I would just be a pediatrician, because that was my original intent, I was like, okay, I'm going to help families and kids to be healthy, happy, and safe. And that was like my core values going into medicine. And pretty quickly, I realized that I didn't have a lot of control over helping people to be happy or healthy. Sometimes I could help them be a little bit more safe. And so I realized that those values that I brought to it was not something necessarily that was from my Christian faith per se. Is more of my, I would say, like American identity to be happy and healthy and safe and, have that independence, I guess. And so as I was just trying to figure out, well, so then what does my faith say about how I practice medicine? Because at the time I had received an idea that to be a good Christian physician meant to go on medical mission trips or to share the gospel with my patients. And I always have to caveat that like those are good things. And if there is an opportunity that arises to do that, then I think that is worth noting. But at the same time, I always want to be careful that I am cognizant of the dynamic at play between me as the physician with the patient who's more vulnerable and I'm in more of a position of authority. So not abusing that as well. And so yeah, I think some of that I was like, well, if that's the measure of being a good Christian physician, I'm really messing this up right now because I'm not, like 90% of my time, I'm not doing those things. And so it came out of that of like, well, what does the Bible say about us as persons? The biggest thing that has made an impact on me is the fact that we're made in God's image. And you see that from the first pages of the Bible. And so then that means the person who's sitting in front of me is also made in God's image. So they're worthy of an inherent dignity and respect, that even when all they have is venom for me and you're yelling at me or something like that, then I can at least control how I see them, how I am, perceiving them. And really that I think was a big turning point for me. And then as I continued into sleep, it was also just along the same lines of as I was accompanying people through their sleepless nights and I'd kind of get to the end of the road, I, had tried all of the tools and their sleep it was better in some ways, but not quote unquote perfect. And I was like, man, I feel like there's something else that I should do because as a physician, my assumption is like I have to fix things. I'm a problem fixer. And so maybe there's something in the Bible that could help me fix people's sleep. So that's certainly how my curiosity brought me to the Bible. And then pretty quickly I realized, oh, the Bible's not a medical textbook. It's not written to have some kind of magical formula that's going to help someone sleep. But then it did, bring about, I think, a deeper revelation to what God has to say about sleep.
And a lot of people will say that, well, the Bible's not a medical textbook and the Bible's not this and that. But there are certain aspects and habits, healthy commands, healthy mindsets, that God wants us to have that attribute medically to doing the right thing, right? A lot of Levitical laws had to do with cleanliness of how to do and handle certain things. And, like you were supposed to have running water to wash your hands, which was always proven. And nowadays we know this, like I learned this when even in survival, you never draw water from stale water.
Right.
You want it moving because it doesn't have static bacteria growing in it like stagnant water does. And so all these things started lending. It's like, wow, it's not a medical textbook, but God's not stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Like God made creation. And so the wisdom that God imparts to us that he's, in some ways we would have to acknowledge God who is such a mystery beyond what he is able to reveal to us. And so accommodates to our limitations and, reveals himself and insights about his creation. And so then part of that, like you're saying, in the wisdom literature, especially in like Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Psalms, Job, a lot of that literature is thinking on like, what does wisdom like mean and what does it mean to, in some ways, live a good life too. And so, I think when it comes to sleep, Proverbs 19:23, the fear of the Lord leads to life so that one may sleep satisfied, untouched by evil. And so, that's not a promise that, oh, if I fear the Lord, that equals good sleep and no evil. And so that's a promise that as long as I am walking the straight and narrow, I'm going to have the best sleep and I'm going to never be touched by evil. And obviously, like, that's not true because Jesus lived the perfect life. And we know from the Gospels that he had sleepless nights. And obviously, he was very touched by evil and that he died on the cross for us. So, like, we can't expect things from, if we are truly like followers of Christ, we can't expect things that not even Jesus was spared from on one hand of things. But getting back to kind of what you're saying, yeah, it's like definitely I think some people can try to say, oh, well, the Bible is not a medical textbook, to push that to the side to say, to invalidate the wisdom that comes from the Bible. And that's exactly what I was seeing while I was in my sleep medicine fellowship is I, especially for insomnia, was where I found the biggest overlap was, okay, I'm telling all of my patients to do these things of, trying to have a bedtime routine, like stop for the day. And if they can't sleep, get out of bed. And then I would be reading the Psalms, and then the Psalms would talk about, someone who's meditating on their bed or rises at midnight and then prays to God. So I was like, okay, there's something here that like I'm seeing these like parallels between these two things. And I just didn't quite have a framework to figure out, okay, what is that parallel?
I think like one of the things that a lot of people have this misconception too is some of the stuff that, the world tells us about, well, you have to have 8 hours of sleep or you have to have all of these different things. But if you could go change one thing, how culture thinks about sleep, what would that be? Where would you say like, hey, culture's leading us astray over here?
Yeah, I think it's weird because there's all kind of two narratives still going on in our culture. There definitely still is the kind of hustle culture that undervalues sleep and is like that idea that I can catch up on sleep. And in some ways, like, yes, you can, as far as like I'm feeling a little bit more fatigued. And so then I sleep more hours and then I'm feeling better. So catch up on your energy level. But the impact that that's having on your body, you can't catch up on that. When you have sleep deprivation, then, all of the derangements that are happening to your body happen. And so one night, okay, no, that's not going to kill you per se. But over a lifetime of foregoing sleep to pursue other ends, then that's going to build and build and build in your body. So that's kind of like one lane that we still have. The interesting thing I would say is now flipping over to the other side, there is this discussion in the mainstream to say like, oh yeah, sleep is important. And so now it's almost swung to an idolizing of sleep. And especially within our American culture, prioritizing my sleep. And like what, like not entering into seasons of challenge and difficulty and, working hard because I have to protect my peace or I have to protect my space. And it's like, yes, at one level, I get that because we live in a culture that like, if you don't have any boundaries for that, then it is so easy to overextend yourself. But to the point where it's like, I'm holding back some of the things that God has given me, or maybe even the goals or pursuits that God has put in front of me out of this. Well, I have such a framework for mental health and wellness and well-being that I can never have a season where that is possibly compromised, if that makes sense. Not so obviously I'm not saying like, swing back the other way, but I think it's like it's somewhere in the middle. And I think at least the impression I see of a theology of sleep from the Bible, I think helps point us back to that center.
Well, I want to kind of go back. You said something you can kind of catch up on sleep if you feel fatigued that day and then you get some more sleep. Oh man, I had a rough night last night, so I'm going to make sure to go to bed early tonight or something like that a lot of people do. But a normal rhythm of really not having some kind of continuity, if you will, isn't really healthy. Because I think from a non-medical perspective, I'm not a doctor, so I think sleep always was looked at as by numbers. So, okay, if I got 4, I need 8, I need another 4, so I'm going to add more here. And it just looked like a numbers game.
Yeah.
And if over the week I had missed out on a full 8 hours total out of the week, I could just do more 8 here.
Yep.
And then I get my number back.
Yep.
And it's not as simple as that. Is what kind of you were alluding to. So like what, from a medical standpoint, what is sleep? what does it do to our body,
Mhm.
benefit, all of that. And then why is, to a point, you can't really catch up on it.
Yeah. So the way that we classify sleep and sleep science right now is by brain waves. Technically, you have predictable changes in your heart rhythm and your breathing and other things that we could measure sleep by other things, but brain waves is kind of the way that we have gone. And we stage sleep into four different stages. Used to be five, but we kind of brought it down to four.
Hmm.
And so you enter into sleep typically through non-REM. It's different for babies. Babies actually kind of enter through REM or their version of it. But for adults, you go into non-REM 1, which is very brief transitional sleep that is maybe like a few minutes most of the time as you are entering into sleep. Non-REM 2 is where you're spending most of your night, and then you will dip down into 3, which is often if you hear people talk about slow wave sleep or deep sleep, that is it kind of oversimplifies things, but I tell people think of that as being restorative for your body. Like if you've ever heard of your sympathetic nervous system, your parasympathetic, so sympathetic's that fight or flight, parasympathetic is rest and digest. And so the deep sleep is predominantly a parasympathetic process. And so it's really good for your body to slow down and to recover from physically from all of the stress that you have endured through the day. And then typically after your first deep sleep, you'll have a brief period where you wake up for a second, go back into non-REM, and then eventually kind of pop into REM sleep. And so that's the rapid eye movement where we typically think about dreams. The first half of your night is predominated by that deep, you have more deep sleep. You have
Hmm.
like a big chunk, and then that kind of fizzles out. And then the second half of the night is more REM sleep. You have a very short period, and then it gets longer and longer. And so REM sleep you can think of as being good for your mind. And so that's very important for memory consolidation. And as you're trying to acquire new skills and learning, creativity, all of those things, we think our REM is an important critical step in that process. So, of course, all of sleep is important for your mind and your body, but that's kind of a way that I try to say to think of those two things. So you can imagine if I am, especially if I am only getting like 4 hours of sleep, most of the time, then you're cutting off some of the REM sleep that you're getting. And so that's going to be impact you by some of those kind of learning, memory, creativity kind of things. But then also, just in general, when you're not getting the sleep that you need, the way that the brain tends to kind of respond is your prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the part that's in charge of executive decision making and attention and things of that nature. That is a little bit more offline. Your basal ganglia, which is like your emotions, that quote unquote primal kind of part of us, is a little bit amped up. And so then that's why I am moody, I'm on edge, I don't feel like myself. I might, be a little bit more impulsive. And all of those changes can happen even just with like one poor night's sleep. And so
Mm.
you compound that on night upon night upon night upon night. That's going to have real impacts that we are seeing in the research now that it's interesting for sleep. You take pretty much any topic and then you just add sleep deprivation and it like makes heart disease worse. It makes certain lung disease worse.
Mm.
It makes your immune system, makes your brain, like mental and emotional health. All of these things are touched by having sleep deprivation. And so, yeah, I think people know that sleep is refreshing and that it's important for that. But we often just don't think about where do I want to be when I'm 90 years old? I remember I was doing this kind of mentoring session for a surgeon. And he's like, okay, how can I organize these things in order to work this amount and stay up this amount and do all this stuff? And I was like, so do you want to have Alzheimer's when you're 90 or not? And he kind of like looked at me like, what? And I was like, because this is not compatible. And that's kind of the hardest thing is there's this misconception that I can do anything in my life and I should be able to then just like switch to being able to go to sleep and, have like an immediately turn off like you would a computer or a light switch. And that's not how humans work. And the same thing, like if you compound that over years in a lifetime, then that's really going to make a big impact when you're older.
I think when you start talking about how it affects the brain, I've personally done some like brain studies and different things like that. And so when talking about that, it starts clicking on like, okay, I'm having a neurological deficit, if you will,
Hmm.
like actually hurting an organ of your body that literally is the primary organ that operates all organs in our body all the time, right? Our brain never actually fully shuts off while we're alive. And so that's a really insightful way to kind of look at it instead of, like I said at the beginning, the numbers. Like I missed 4, I'll catch up 4, and then it's
Yeah.
just a numbers game, but it's not when you look at it from that neurological kind of standpoint.
And that's certainly better than never trying to catch up. Like if you're at least
Yeah.
getting some hours of like 8 or 10, great. That's fantastic. And often I'm talking to people about like, there's the ideal and there's reality. And so oftentimes, like our reality is like, I try to be really cognizant as I was writing the book to think about the person who works 2 or 3 jobs and is a single parent and has all of this like stress on their shoulders. And it's like they literally cannot get 10 hours because they have so much demands and they're not in a season of life where they have the autonomy to be able to change that. And so it's like, okay, how can we meet you where you are at to try and get the best outcomes for you compared to someone who is in a more stable position in their life and they can make these changes, but they just choose not to.
Yeah, and I think that there's also the middle ground where we do have busy lives, but I think that some other items in our life intermittently also take up a lot of different things too.
Yeah.
Where you may still be working 2 different jobs and a single mom and you're grinding, but sometimes in between we're doom scrolling, and to get that escape for a little bit or whatever, when really if we took those hours, which they do build up in hours, right? We can all check our phone and now see how much time we've spent on the phone.
Yeah.
Hey, we need to forego that and put it towards something healthier like sleep for ourselves. And what about napping? Where do you find like definitely for, hey, I got one job, I got another job. In between, I have 2 hours. Maybe I can get an hour of sleep and then commute.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's always a great question because the last rule of my sleepless night rules in the book, it says resist sleeping in and taking naps. And that's the point where people are like, you lost me. I need
Wait
my
a minute,
naps.
Jesus took naps.
Yeah,
Like, what are we
what are you
talking about
doing?
here?
You're being heretical, Dr. Long.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. I was like, it said that in here, so that's
Yeah.
kind of where I was going. Like, wait a minute, I
Right.
thought naps were good.
Right, right. And so in that section, I usually tell people I say resist for a reason, not like, destroy or something more, definitive because yeah, you might be in a season where I just need to be able to be on my A game and I can't do that right now with the amount of sleep I'm getting overnight. And so in general, I definitely am like pro taking a nap as long as it stays as a nap. If you are trying to you're like, "Oh, I take like a 3-hour nap." You're not taking a nap. You're sleeping in the middle of the day, kind of a thing. And so some of it really is expectation management because people are like, Dr. Long, I just can't nap. I try to lay down, but I don't fall asleep. A nap, truly, you're not going to get into that deep sleep that we were talking about, that like slow wave sleep. And if you do, oftentimes, if you are suddenly kind of like an alarm goes off or something, you come out of that sleep, you're more prone to get what's called sleep inertia, where you feel that grogginess. And so oftentimes, if you have
Yeah.
experienced that where you take a nap and you wake up, you're like, oh, I just like feel drunk. That may be that you were coming out of a stage of sleep where you weren't ready to kind of wake up. And so oftentimes sleep doctors will say, try to minimize your nap to about 10 to 20 minutes. 15 is probably a good middle ground. And that's enough time where you get down into sleep briefly and you will get some of the benefit of having some of that energy restored but not get down into that deep sleep. And most people, when they hear 15 minutes, they're like, I can't do that. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So oftentimes for those people, I say, okay, don't even put the pressure on yourself that this is a nap. All I want you to do is go into your bedroom, close your eyes, set your alarm on your phone or something for 20 minutes and just focus for 20 minutes on taking deep breaths. And, whether that is you want to like count sheep or something like that, like don't put a pressure on, am I actually falling asleep? That shouldn't be the question of success. I want you to focus on how do I feel before, which is usually sleepy and tired, and then check yourself afterwards. How do I feel right now? And it's like naps aren't going to be fill up the tank and I'm at 100% and I'm ready to conquer the world. It should be I wake up and I'm like, I'm not quite as tired. Like you notice a difference. And that's, I think the problem with naps is most people, they're sleeping. They're not actually taking a nap.
Yeah, I think when I was younger and in college, I could take a quote unquote power nap
Hmm.
and feel a little bit more rejuvenated. But I think being younger, I was able to do that.
Hmm.
Now, if I take a nap after church and then my kids wake me up on a Sunday
Yeah.
after that nap, I'm in deep sleep and then I'm wondering, who am I? Where am I? What century is it? Like you have no idea what's going on anymore.
Right.
The power nap is not something I feel I can do anymore in
Hmm.
my 40s. And so, how does age also affect a lot of this? I mean, I feel it as I explained, but
Yeah.
what's the science behind all that?
Yeah. Newborns come into this world actually sleeping more than they are awake. From the age of 2 down, predominant activity of life is sleep, which I know for parents of newborns that are listening to this, they're like, "You're totally wrong, Dr. Long. He doesn't sleep at all." Like, what are you talking about? And so, yes, unfortunately, that's not 14 to 17 hours in one go. Otherwise, we would have way more babies because everyone would be like, "This is so easy." But all of the sleep over a 24-hour period, and the first about month of life or so is 14 to 17. Then you have that first quote unquote sleep regression closer to the 2 month mark. And then kids shift down to 12 to 15 hours, which is kind of where they are for the rest of the first year of life. And so then that continues to go down to 7 to 9 hours that we think about in adulthood. And so then as we get older, we also know there tends to be a little bit of a step down as people age, kind of around midlife to, older once you're getting closer to 65. And so we know that sleep tends to can be more disrupted, not getting as much sleep. You can have changes in your circadian rhythm. So you can think about your circadian rhythm as an activating rhythm. So the easiest way for me to explain this is if you've ever stayed awake for 24 hours and you get to the next morning and all of a sudden you're like not quite as tired and you're like, this makes literally no sense because I have been up for 26 hours now, so I should be sleepy, but I feel like I can't go to sleep. That is because of your circadian rhythm. That is this kind of waxing and waning pattern that's roughly on a 24-hour pattern. That is a activating rhythm. And so you hear people say like they're a night owl that tend to have like a later circadian rhythm versus an earlier one. And typically, as we get older, it's common for that to shift a little bit more forward too, which is why we have that like cultural idea that breakfast at like for special for the seniors at IHOP or,
Hmm.
the dinner at like, 4 p.m. or something because all the seniors are already in bed by it's like 6 or 7 o'clock kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So there are definitive changes, and especially for women, and like perimenopause is a big disruptor of sleep for them as well. And that's like a whole other topic too. That
Hmm.
does continue to make things difficult. Definitely can be something to talk to a sleep doctor about.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into the lady part because I do get some of our female viewers and things like that. And so I know that some of them are wanting to hear about all of those hormonal and life age and type changes and how that affects them. And the other part, I think, just from even ladies that I've talked to that are excited to hear this conversation, and even just the rest of us as dads, as being a parent, as you talked about, well, it's not 14 hours that baby sleeps straight, right? Which would be marvelous, 8 hours plus they're still asleep while I wake up and I can do all sorts of things and then play with them. And then it's wonderful. And
Hmm.
it's like, that's not how this goes. And as kids develop those change. And I have three and I see different sleep
Yes.
with different ones. My Finally, my third one will take naps. My first one, we called him toothpick eyes. He never took it. He fought through it, never took a nap. We were just like, we don't count on him at all because he's
Right.
not going to. So if he's going to be awake, we'll do something with him. Because then when he went to bed at night, he crashed and he was out,
Yeah.
but there was no nap in the middle. There was no break for mom, kind of
Yeah.
thing. But as we develop and raise kids, and so I want to start getting into the habit and talk
Yeah.
of what are habits we can do for
Hmm.
ourselves, but then also what are habits that we should be training our kids to have earlier on so they don't go through some of the ugly, rough stuff that we're probably experiencing nowadays.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind, one, is who are you listening to for your information on sleep training or information about sleep or what you should or should not do? There's so many people, and it's not hard to find that online of how you should do something. From one standpoint, I really try to empower people. Like, if you're listening to someone who is telling you this way is the only way, or this way is the best way, or I'm getting really nervous or anxious or afraid whenever I'm listening to this voice about sleep, like, don't listen to them. Because I think any
Mm,
true sleep doctor who knows the research will tell you you do not have to sleep train. Like, sleep training has a short term benefit for children's and family. But then the longer that we kind of follow that out, then eventually it reaches some point where you can't tell a difference between the children who are sleep trained and not. And so because of that, I take the position to say, we need to make sure that we're finding a plan for you that works for your family and your specific context.
hmm
And so another thing that comes to my mind as far as like some ways we can go off the rails with that is there's all this information online about like for infant sleep wake windows and nap schedules and like should you get kids on a schedule, should you not get kids on a schedule. I always tell families use that as a guideline because for some kids it works and it works great, just as you were saying. Like no two children are the same, and there are some who are able to take naps who are not.
hmm
And so often a big part of my practice is helping parents kind of zoom out and look at, okay, how much sleep is my kid getting over 24 hours? Because if they're supposed to get 12 to 15 hours and most of that's overnight, then that's totally fine if they don't take naps. Like in my book, as far as when we're talking about brain development and healthy and growing,
hmm
that's the main thing I get concerned about is how much sleep are we getting over a 24-hour period? And I would tell you, most of the kids who come to my clinic, they're in this like odd spot between, if you think about a typical bell curve, we know that 2 standard deviations is definitely not normal. We don't often talk about the kids who are stuck in that 90th to 95th percentile. That like you're not so abnormal that I diagnose you with something, but you're certainly not in the center. And I'd say that's most of the families that come to my sleep clinic is if you look at the 12 to 15 in that like infant period, we know that there's some kids who will sleep 10 to 11. And that's totally fine. And they just might be quote unquote like shorter sleepers. But obviously, if I'm the mom and I only get 10 hours of sleep and all of the other moms in the group are talking about how their kids are getting, closer to 14 or 15 hours, then I feel like something is definitely wrong. Or
Yeah, the comparison really
yep.
starts kicking our butt, right?
Yep. Yep. So that's the big thing is the who you're listening to and how they're telling you to do it, and knowing that there has been a little bit of a uptick in talking about these things like schedules and regiments and wake windows and stuff of that nature. And so just use those if they are helpful. Pick them up or put them down. That's totally fine. And the
I
last thing
think
I'll
that that's
say,
really, I just like that's really freeing for a lot of parents right there. Because I think a lot of parents we do the comparison game. Well, Johnny down the street or the mom down the street is so perfect with their schedule, like they won't come hang out and have lunch with me because their kid's schedule, right? And they really run their lives off of it, and too many moms almost have extra anxiety
yeah.
over the comparison game or
hmm
well, this is what something on whatever TV show with some expert that says they have to do this. And then, and they're like, I'm not meeting that. Oh my gosh, am I hurting my kid? And all of this. And I think that gives a lot healthier way for a mom to go, you know what? My kid doesn't have to be this picture perfect, scheduled kid, and they're still doing just fine.
Yep. Absolutely. And a lot of times, like, we like to take credit to say, like, oh, it's because of my parenting that I have this good sleeper, but not really. Because as you just said
That's
about,
also
like,
freeing too.
yeah, like, there really are some people don't like this language, but there really are true good sleepers and bad sleepers. And what I mean by good and bad is there are children who they have a larger portion of sleep. In infants, we talk about quiet sleep versus active sleep. And there are kids who actually just have more quiet sleep than other kids. And that's actually one of the non-modifiable factors that research has found that it's more likely for those children to be sleep trained by 12 months old than a kid who doesn't have as much quiet sleep. And that's something that parents have like no control over. And so obviously like those families aren't coming to me because those kids are able to fall asleep easier and have less disruption to their sleep compared to other things. Is it that simple and straightforward? Because of obviously there's a whole lot of factors that are going into it behaviorally too, but there is a component that there are some kids who are just better, quote unquote, better sleepers, and that has nothing to do with how I am parenting them.
There you go, mom and dad.
Yeah, yep. And the last thing for a little bit older age range, something that can help your kiddos out in the long run is if they can't fall asleep. I think most of us grew up with just lay down, just like go back to bed and lay down until you can actually like fall asleep. And that actually can be kind of counterintuitive. Trying, if you can, to make an expectation that if a child can't fall asleep, allowing them to have some other space in their bedroom that they can sit in until they get sleepy. Obviously, this is going to be different for different ages and capabilities and things of that nature. So it isn't a one size that fits all. But especially if parents have a history of insomnia and have difficulty falling asleep, and so that seems like that's something that runs in the family, if that might be something that this child could be at risk for as they grow up, having them just stay awake in bed, not falling asleep, could be conditioning them to associate the bed with a place of wakefulness. So oftentimes I'm talking to families about brainstorming, okay, is there a way that we can have them sit somewhere else in their room quietly until they fall asleep? And that's very different if I'm talking to a family of a 4-year-old compared to a 7-year-old compared to like an 11-year-old, obviously.
Yeah, like, and I think sometimes I get into this, like, no, you must go to your bed and
Yeah.
all this. But my two older ones, they like to sometimes sleep in the guest bed,
Hmm.
and it's a bigger one, and they sleep in there together, and they kind of think of it as like a vacation, and they actually sleep better sometimes. And I think also knowing that they have some company next to them instead of by themselves or whatever. And so
Yeah.
I've kind of, okay, if you sleep better that way, then it's healthier, right?
Right, right. Like sleep onset associations is what we call the conditions that you need in order to fall asleep. And so when we're talking about sleep training and parents being present and trying to remove parents from falling asleep at bedtime, that's the most common barrier for infants to be able to fall back asleep when they wake up in the middle of the night because parents are not present. And so it is easier for them to fall asleep with the same condition. And people like to talk about this in a lot of ways, but it's the same thing of like if you all of a sudden are, in a hotel room or some other place that's not your typical sleeping environment, it's never like exactly like perfect easy for you to fall asleep the same way because you are conditioned to my surroundings. And so you're in a place where my bed might not feel quite right, the air conditioning has like a weird rattle, there's some other sounds, all this stuff that's contributing to you not being able to fall asleep. And so I
Sound like
tell
at a Motel 8 right there.
yeah,
Buddy.
yeah, exactly.
Or something.
Exactly. So I tell people it's a skill. We learning how to fall asleep by yourself and then fall back asleep when you after a normal nighttime awakening is a skill. And so there's a difference between your season of life if you are trying to learn that skill and acquire that skill versus once you have it. So oftentimes people will hear like, okay, so then my child can never come to the bedroom or we can never do like a sleepover or something like that where kids are in the guest room or something like that. And it's like, no, if once you've acquired that skill, then you know how to do it. And so having some one-offs are okay. So that's a totally different season of life. But the season we're in right now is if it is your goal for them to fall asleep by themselves and fall back asleep by themselves, then requires different behaviors.
All right, I want to get into one other habitual topic, and it's usually a pretty hot button one for a lot of parents. And then I want to transition into like more of the theology stuff, and then talking about your book a little bit. But let's be honest, it's the phones, it's the screens, it's the TVs, it's the iPads. We hear so much about, oh, the blue light keeps them awake, or this and that, and talk to me about it. Yes, no, put it away, burn them all. What do we do?
Right, exactly. And it's like, I think people immediately jump to, okay, I have to be a Luddite and eliminate all screens from my household and can never have screens. And certainly I think that could be an option. But for a majority of people, I think screens are here to stay. So how do we put the boundaries on it that are going to help our sleep? And I am happy that we have this understanding that blue light is not good for us. as far as our sleep health, but I also am not happy that it's actually just light in general. Like if you think
Mm,
about it, before we had electricity or anything like that, it was just dark. And so if it is completely dark and you have nothing to do because you literally can't see to do anything, that's going to be way easier for you to fall asleep compared to even just having like lights on your house. Like that is kind of the, I don't like the language of hacks, but quote unquote, like biggest hack that I feel like most people don't utilize is just literally shut everything down. And not only just screens, but like if you have dimmable lights or can turn them off, or I'll often tell people to like get the plug in night lights that are like automatic turn on when the lights are off that you can put
hmm
so you can kind of navigate in the house. The biggest hack would be just shut everything off an hour before bedtime and then just like be in the dark. And like that is going to be the biggest thing because your light exposure is the strongest signal to your circadian rhythm that it's time to be awake. And so oftentimes, especially I know melatonin would be like a totally other conversation that we could have. But one of the biggest hindrances to effective melatonin use is I pop that melatonin and then I'm on my screen for a little bit until I'm falling asleep. And those two things, the light is going to win over the melatonin. So you're not actually getting the benefit from it because you can think of melatonin as just darkness in a pill. So it's kind of like you are sending a signal to your brain that it's dark, but then it's seeing all the light. And so the light is going to win out, even though you've taken this, whopping dose of melatonin.
hmm Yeah. And I mean, our bodies naturally make melatonin as
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
right?
So a lot lower doses than typically what we will use to help kind of induce sleep. So there's different, you can do a really low dose melatonin to kind of help with that circadian rhythm if you're trying to slide that for some people. But yes, our bodies like make it on its own. A common misconception with melatonin is that I'll become dependent upon it or use it. And there's you don't get addicted to melatonin like you do like opioid medications. It doesn't. True addiction is there is a change that happens within my brain. And when I take that away, then like that change, I have a difficult time to getting back to before the medicine versus melatonin. It's like my body's natural melatonin secretion is going to be decreased because it senses all of this melatonin that I've taken. But then you stop taking it within a couple days, it's going to come back to where it's at. So will you notice for several days? Absolutely. And then there's a whole behavioral component. If you've taken years of I have this ritual of taking a pill, and if all of a sudden I'm not doing that, there's actually some really interesting research of people who they're trying to look at the placebo effect and people who know this pill is just nothing. I am taking this pill. I've been told it's a placebo, but I'm going to
hmm
take it to help me fall asleep. And I'm going to believe that it helps me fall asleep. It actually works. And so that's kind of like
Even though they
baffling,
know it's a
even though they
placebo.
know it. Yeah. And so that's what they're
That's
like,
wild.
what is going on here? And I think we really underestimate the power of our mind, the power of the placebo
hmm
effect of, okay, we're doing this open trial where people know that they're taking it. And for at least a portion of people, it still works for them. So it just shows the power of the behaviors that I have and the rituals that I have. And if I change those things, how that can become its own barrier for your sleep.
Wow. All right. So keep the phones, just, put
Turn them
boundaries on
off.
them and turn them off and all that kind of good stuff. But,
Yeah.
in certain ways, thank God we have them, you know?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, don't, I mean, if you want to go Amish, go Amish. But
Yeah.
I think that that's always such a great thing, though, when you start combining the theology to it to kind of open up into that side of it. There was one I really loved. It was on page 104 of your book here, and I'm going to read it real quick. It's an excerpt out of Psalm 77, verses 4 through 6. You have held my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I have considered the days of old, the years of long ago. I will remember my song in the night. I will meditate with my heart and my spirit ponders. And you say in this devotional in here, barriers to good rest can feel overwhelming. The speaker in Psalm 77 is so troubled that it leaves him speechless and unable to sleep. But the psalm does not end with this focus on distress. Rather, the speaker turns to the days of old, in quotes, and remembers previous songs in the night. This choice to remember becomes a theme for the rest of the psalm and displays a path through the sleepless nights. And I underlined this one right here. When you remember who God is and what he has done, you're more able to turn away from the despair and towards hope. And I really love that. And that's part of his journal here. And so you want to make sure to pick this up. But you really, the other part of it is not just theology in here. It's, you also still bring the science, which is this, that's, I think sets this apart from so many other devotionals out there, is that you also, you talk about the, what compounding effects turn into insomnia and all of those other kinds of things. And of course, we were laughing earlier on how one of them is if you're female,
Yeah.
kind of deal. And so, bring all that up in here too. But like the theology of sleep, like what did that start doing when you started looking at and bringing theology into all of the science that you started saying, and just going, wow, what were the light bulbs that were kind of turning on as you started doing that research?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say first, I'm sorry to all the female listeners that unfortunately that's a predisposing factor to insomnia. And so is it just something inherent to being female like we were talking about? No, there's definitely a lot more going on socially, culturally, hormonally, and stuff that's contributing to that. But just what we know from the research, women are reported to have more insomnia just on a large scale compared to men. So
Hmm.
obviously can't change that. So the book's kind of getting to, so what are the things that we can manage and contribute to?
Hmm.
And that's exactly what I wanted to bring to writing this book, was making it a practical resource and practical tool. I very rarely will say to get you better sleep. I might, I think says that in certain places, kind of for advertising and marketing. That could have a whole conversation on my part in that. But oftentimes I am just focusing on getting you better sleep habits and changing our behaviors, because the best evidence that we have to responding to sleeplessness is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And so the book is written around what's called the sleepless night rules, which is my adaptation of what's called stimulus control instructions that help to give you some guardrails to how to respond to sleeplessness. So I wanted something that was very practical, but then also at the same time realizing that all medicine and all therapies and interventions that we have are coming out of some kind of worldview and philosophy, theology of practice. And I wanted to be a bridge to connect that to a Christian worldview and what we see of sleep and sleeplessness in the Bible. So help us just think more Christianly about the topic, because a lot of it just arose from accompanying people. Me, I get a spiritual history for all of my patients, and I ask them, is spirituality or religion an important part of your daily life? And so they'll say that they're Christian, that Bible reading and prayer is important to their spiritual life. And yet when I got to insomnia, and if they ever call upon that part of their lives when they're responding to sleeplessness, most people like looked at me like, what are you talking about? Kind of like, no. And or like, oh, maybe I should pray. And so I just saw this gap for the Christians that I was accompanying. And so that was a big part of creating this resource, was let's see how the Bible frames sleep and sleeplessness. And then really what arose from it, as we were talking about earlier, that it's not a medical textbook, but the wisdom that we see in the Bible is that it really highlights that connection with God and connection with those around us. And so the idea that sleep is a gift, yes, you can go to ancient Greece and Rome, and that, and other cultures that sleep was considered a gift from the gods. So, like, not necessarily novel to the Bible. But I think that the framing of a gift in the setting of God's character and who he is and the love that he shows us, that's drastically different. And that in Psalm 127 is where it comes, I think, most to the forefront, that says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who labor build in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, those who are watching stay awake in vain. It is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep. And I remember the first time I read that was like, this is like people are saying this to me essentially in their histories of like, I've got so much to do. I've got all this stuff. I got to get up early, got to hustle and do all this stuff.
Hmm.
And because of that, we're eating this bread of anxious toil. Like there's this beautiful song that there's a lyric from it that said, "All I know is striving for this harvest of fool's gold." And it's a very similar feeling of eating that bread of anxious toil. Like the result of that rising early and going late to rest is I am sowing this like anxiousness to believing that I am the one that's in control. But the only bread that I can produce is from that anxious toil. When in reality, unless God is the one who is watching over the city or, building, then it's all in vain. And so that illusion of control. And so recognizing that creature creation distinction, and then the next line being that this sleep is a gift, that he loves me, he cares for me, and he has given this to me as a grace and good part of his creation.
You know, I just think about how there are times though that Jesus actually got on to his disciples for why wouldn't you stay awake
Hmm.
and pray and
Yeah.
tarry with me
In
another
the
night,
garden.
and so there are times that we do need to stay awake, or we need to power drive through something, or
Yeah.
whatever. Like it's an important, we talk like I'm a military guy. Did my service. There was definitely times of like, I was even trained. You took a 9-volt battery
Hmm.
and you put it on your teeth,
Mm,
and then when the two prongs like touched your tongue, like it
dang.
zapped you to keep you awake, like on guard. So you had the 9-volt battery, and if you
Boy.
fell asleep, it
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
okay and stay awake. And I learned that from guys that operated in the Cold War on like the when the Berlin Wall was still up, and they were on guard along the wall for
Yeah.
anybody that would come across, or guys that were in South Korea along, the border with North Korea, and all these other kinds of areas where guys had to stay awake on guard for all these important areas and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it was like, no, you don't get caught falling asleep.
Right. Right.
But then we do have this culture, but those are small amounts of time. Those are
Hmm.
this moment in time. Don't go to sleep. You have a duty to do, versus the culture of hustle culture all the time. Like I'm going to, and it's so true how I'm just going to spin my wheels over and over for this fool's gold, like it says, or just this toil
Hmm.
that I want to build. And then at the end of your days, what is this really doing for you? The Lord tells us not to store up stuff where moths and rust will take away, but store up yourself treasures in heaven. And we can't do that the best if we don't have proper sleep. Sleep is probably one things I can't think of that anybody's ever said, you need to fast from sleeping. It's fast from food,
Yeah.
fast from whatever. Nobody ever, I'm going to do a sleep fast. No, no, that doesn't happen.
Right.
Your
Right.
body won't let you.
Yeah. And that's like early church. That's actually something I'm studying in seminary right now. It's very flipped. There was a decreased emphasis on sleep, a lot of that arising from um, the narrative in the Garden of Gethsemane of Jesus being awake and commanding his disciples to keep watch, and they're unable to do so. But then also, other parts within the New Testament that of the servant who is awake at night and doesn't know at what hour the master is going to return. So keeping watch and keeping vigil.
Hmm.
And there's a long history of the importance of being awake and watching at night. And that's, I get a little bit of that in the book towards the end of that when we are connecting with God, remembering our past, being present to the current, but then also watching for the future. And that's still something I'm trying to unpack that watching, because I think that there probably is some benefit for us spiritually in foregoing sleep for the purpose of watching. And I think we've lost a little bit of that from our Christian practice in modern times. And yet I think I have somewhere in there too that I'm like, I'm not saying if you're a sleep deprived, mother of a newborn or something like that, then you need to like stay up watching or something. So like that's not what I'm saying at all. If anything, maybe on the flip side of something, if I'm a fantastic sleeper, I have no problems with my sleep, and there are people in my circle who are struggling with their sleep, then asking myself, am I being called to sacrifice some portion of my sleep to help my brother or sister in whatever season of life they find themselves in? I think that is something that's more relevant to us today that we can learn from Christian history of the importance of watching. But then it does also, I think, bring us to this promised future that we have of new creation, especially in Revelation. That there's this interesting part at the end of Revelation where it says that there will be no night in new creation. And I often find myself thinking, like, okay, so are we going to sleep? Are we not going to sleep? And obviously we don't know, but me as a sleep nerd, I like to ponder that sometimes. But I think the kind of vision that we get from the Bible is that Jesus is coming back and that there is something beneficial for Christians to practice that embodied in their lives to remember that. And I think the ancient church got that a little bit when they had a practice of watching. And there are still faith traditions today that hold vigils and have time to be awake that I think have held on to that in some way. But I think that is a word for us today because, like, do I think that the return of Christ is as certain as the dawn of tomorrow morning? Like,
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, no, that's
like
yeah,
preaching that
that's
to
definitely
myself.
one of those, like, how deep is your faith?
Yeah.
Like, we nobody questions the sun coming up tomorrow morning. Do you also do you do you have the faith that also the sun will come back?
Yeah. And as you read some of the ancient sources, there was this kind of connection with day and night, sunset, sunrise, and death and resurrection. And
Mhm.
so I think it was a real embodied way that people were experiencing and preaching the resurrection to themselves of, I'm in this present darkness, in this broken world, and yet I know the sun's going to rise. And in the same way, I can know that Jesus' death and resurrection was true and that he will come back to the point that actually in ancient kind of Christian practice, there was a portion of communal worship where the church would face the east because a little bit there was a thought that Jesus might, from the east when he returns, but also and Augustine writes about it that he says that part of it was also just for us to kind of put our minds onto something greater than ourselves that we see in the sun rising. And so the ancient church had a very embodied Christian practice that I think we over intellectualize or overthink today of like, okay, I need to have faith that Jesus is going to return. And if I just like think that enough or preach it to myself enough, or if I just find the right way to think about it, then it's going to sink down to my heart. But what we forget is that it's our body that teaches the soul. And so oftentimes these practices that we have had of kneeling in prayer, of turning to the east, of staying awake to watch or something,
Mhm.
I think that is an important part of getting that down to our heart that we've lost.
No, I think you're right because I mean, when we read even a lot of Old Testament, I think it's a lot of times then when they would pray while they were exiled in Babylon,
Mm,
they always faced towards Jerusalem. So the idea of facing in a certain direction of towards Jerusalem, towards the east, towards, the idea of that's more in the direction towards God. And then ultimately it gives you this mentality of I'm posturing myself towards Christ. Ultimately, right at the end of the day, that's what it's doing, and that's also the taking a knee,
hmm
right? Every knee shall bow, right? When we kneel and pray, it literally postures your body for the idea that I'm humbling myself to
hmm
you right now,
Yep.
right? Because if you think about it, and also like just learning certain fighting moves and all these other kind of stuff, when you're on your knees, you're at your most vulnerable. You're at one of your most vulnerable positions, right? On your feet is a lot better
hmm
when being
hmm
able to defend yourself.
Right.
And so when you're at your most vulnerable, you're very humble at that moment. And so putting your body in that posture also does put your mind and the rest of you in there. And I think that that's a big deal. And Proverbs tells us of the one that loves sleep, the one that loves to always, be resting and not doing anything. And,
Yeah.
you just envision the fat guy with grapes getting, handed to him and he gets to nap all the time and all day is, woe to you that is the sloth, basically, is
Mm-hmm.
kind of the, I don't, that's not verbiage, but that's basically the idea is,
Yeah.
that, hey, you're a lazy bum. Like,
Yep.
that's not good. And
Yeah.
it's not what God envisaged us to do. It's like, when we're awake, be vigilant, be ready, be working, be doing good, and be focused on Christ, and then get your sleep, right? We have Sabbath day. The Lord rested on the seventh day. And so rest is not wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's what you're getting at in here, is that rest is healthy along with a healthy work day. Get healthy sleep to have a healthy work day, but don't overdo one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Don't overdo your sleep, but also don't overdo your work to where you don't get healthy sleep, because you're just going to wear yourself down. Our body is a gift, and we need to treat it appropriately,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
I've
so
unfortunately heard.
that's what I'm getting at it. Your
Yeah, no, I
stuff.
was gonna say I've unfortunately heard like interpretations of like Proverbs 19:15 of like laziness casts into a deep sleep and an idle man will suffer hunger. So like if you are ever taking a nap, then you're being lazy and that's wrong and bad. When you're looking at the bigger picture, it really gets more at if my sleep is intruding into my responsibility of the day. So going
Mhm.
to like Proverbs 10:5, he who gathers in summer is a son who acts wisely, but he who sleeps in a harvest is a son who acts shamefully. So like, that it's okay to like take a nap. If anything, if you're going to the like cultural historical context of the Bible, most likely in the midday heat in the ancient Near East, a lot of those people were actually taking a nap. It's hard
Mhm.
for us a little bit linguistically because there are places where there's a rest, but there are a couple places where it looks pretty distinctively like someone is taking a nap in the middle of the day, and that's just seen as normal. But outside of that, the wisdom that we're getting from the Bible is saying that like sleep, it has the boundaries. Like God has created this ordered creation. And so then if we let that bleed into our day, then that is going to have an impact on my waking life. And so like
Mhm.
how do I draw those boundaries? How do I draw those lines? And what does that look like for me?
No, absolutely, because I think um, that's a big deal. In in this, I think that this is a great book, and I can't wait to. I haven't read all of it. I really gave it a really good look through. I'm gonna start doing some of the exercises in here, like on this one on page 72 and 73, is the tracking your sleep journal, how to night 1, 2, and 3. There are other areas on here where you talk about even looking back at your childhood sleep, and when you had, say, a traumatic event that you happened in your childhood and stuff like that. How was your sleep then? Or if you remember having a hard time sleeping at a certain age, what events were happening in
Yeah.
that life, and trying to make those connections as well, which is it's very big, because I think also what we experience in life throughout all of these does also have, if you will, a theological impact on our spiritual life as well, which will have all of this big impact on here too. What would be some of your most practical tips for anybody? I know we kind of more geared towards men on this podcast, but really anybody, because I got female listeners too.
Yeah.
What would be like your top 3 things? Like, hey, you want better sleep? You're having a hard time? Here's my number 3 right in here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, going back, I know we said we wanted to bring it back to the women who are listening to this podcast. So, a huge one, if you're going through perimenopause, is talking to your doctor about hormone therapy. That has gotten a big kind of negative rap for a long time because of old research on um, estrogen use that was. In typically older women used for longer and at higher doses. And so then more current research has shown actually when it's closer to perimenopause and lower doses and you don't have any risk factors, that actually really helps for sleep disturbances due to perimenopause. So that could be a whole conversation in and of itself. And I have had that conversation on a couple different other podcasts. So I'm sure if you search my name and sleep and perimenopause, hopefully one of those podcasts pops up. But that's a huge one, would just be talking to your doctor about that. Another big thing that you could start would just be ceasing, having a bedtime. Oftentimes we have a time to wake up in the morning, but oftentimes when I talk to people about a bedtime, they're like, well, sometimes I go to bed at 9:30, sometimes it's 10:30, sometimes this, depending upon what's happening in the day. So if you're the kind of person that I have this to-do list and my sleep waits for my to-do list, flip that and have a time that not necessarily that your head's hitting the pillow, but a time that I'm shutting everything off and that I am moving in a direction towards sleep. And I'm, kind of
Mhm.
drawing a line in the sand. And the last one I'll say, especially my overthinkers or my clock watchers, the very anxious soul is a very
That's me.
raising the hand. That's very common. And oftentimes people are hearing about having like a notepad at bedside to kind of write down your thoughts to get them off your brain, which if
Mm.
that works for you, great. Like if you're not trying that, that's a good place to start. The way that I tend to kind of modify that a little bit is also scheduling worry time. So doing it outside of the bedroom, not at bedtime. And then again, this is not magic, but what it does is it forces you to try and contain your worries to worry time. So that way, if I start worrying about something at bedtime, I'm like, nope, if this is important, I'll worry about it at worry time tomorrow. And then some people get into the cycle, but like, but what if I forget my worry? And they start getting into this thing. And then, I have to say, that's okay. Because if it really is important, then you're going to remember it at worry time. You're hurting yourself by worrying about worrying, kind of a thing. So
I mean, that's scriptural right there. Take
yeah,
every thought captive and make it
yeah,
obedient to Christ.
yeah.
So, yeah, at this time, that's when I'm going to do that.
Yeah. And there are some activities in the journal. I really encourage people to use the index because it's put by topic there too. So
Mhm.
if you are like, oh, hey, I really want to focus on more of these kind of like behavioral interventions for sleep, then there's like a sleep education area. But then there's also kind of a little bit topical too of like, I just need some peace. I need some joy. I need some comfort. I have it
Yeah.
divided by those as well of trying to, what was an activity that might be moving you in that direction. And um so yeah, worry time, I think that is one of them that I have in the book too, of just kind of getting that outside of the bedroom and trying to practice that. Your worries will most likely, as you start practicing it, a little bit of a bell curve, seem like it's getting worse before it gets better. But then eventually you kind of run out of things to worry about. And then you have it all down on a page, and then you can start the practical things or real things. You can start trying to challenge or plan or kind of do something about some of those worries too.
I think there's some genius to what you're saying there is just the simple fact, get it out of the bedroom.
Hmm.
Because I think most couples, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, write it in the comment if this is you, right? But the bedroom is, mom and dad's boardroom.
Hmm.
Right, they
Yeah.
sit in bed and they're talking about everything, finances. Are we raising the kids right? You shouldn't have yelled at the kid that, like the common things of the day, planning your meals out, whatever, right? All the stuff to run the house. You're probably having a lot of that conversation laying in bed because with our busy schedules, that's probably one of the most few times that naturally you come together and can have some undivided attention. And in all reality, that's not the place to be bringing, because all those things equal, well, if it's what are we going to cook for dinner, then that means it's a grocery list, right? Which can be financial burden as well, depending, especially nowadays. It can be, well, our parenting style, another, stressor on your mind. All of those equal stressors of managing the house, managing the family. And it's like, that should not be in the bedroom. The bedroom should be, you
Yeah.
know, sleep and sex, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Keep happy thoughts,
Yeah. Yeah.
happy thoughts.
Yeah.
So
No, my wife used
put
to
the
get on to
boardroom in the
me.
kitchen, put the boardroom at the
Yes.
table downstairs, put, almost like transfer the stress out of the zone. And
Hmm.
you talked about this with kids too, of like, if you can't fall asleep just laying in bed, where can you fall asleep?
Yep.
Where's a spot? And I think, I don't know, there's goodness in that. There's some genius in that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was gonna say my wife used to get on to me because early on in our marriage, I would like be lying in bed and then have like some truth bomb of like this, and I'm like, okay, good night, and then turn and like go to bed. And
And
she's
she's
like,
munching on it, and you're just like, "I'm
yeah,
going to
I
sleep."
was like, I've unloaded this off of my conscience. I can go to sleep now.
Yeah, now she's like, "I'm pondering it, thinking about it, can't go to sleep now because
Yeah,
I didn't get to process it yet."
right.
Man.
So I don't do
Yeah,
that
no.
anymore.
Yeah, no, and yeah, no, the bedroom needs to be happy thoughts, all happy thoughts
Hmm.
kinda thing, to be able to get sleep, to be able to get all those other things in our life that we need.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, Doctor DeLong, this is great. Uh, I'm really first of all, thank you, because I just want to, you sent me this. And so this is a gift. And I just want to say thank you for sending me this gift. You didn't have to do. And so I'm really enjoying it. My wife's even picking it up and things like that as well. And so um, we're going to we're going to use this. We're going to really enjoy this. So thank you so much. Thank you for being on with us. I'm sure, where is the best place to capture you if we need to get in touch with you, if some people need like deeper sleep therapy or anything like that, or even just like, I want to know more.
Yeah.
Where can we get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So easiest place for the book is sleephabitsjournal.com. That'll take you right to my website and has all of the different booksellers there for where you can purchase that. I don't currently do any like coaching or I'm practicing like adult sleep medicine at this time because I'm focusing on doing the book, but definitely encourage people if you are even just like, I feel like my sleep could be better, or like I'm not totally satisfied with the sleep that I'm getting. And oftentimes people are just like, they just put that off because they're like, oh, that's just life. I encourage you to try and find a sleep doctor near you. If you're experiencing insomnia, looking up cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So you could literally like use my book as you're going to a psychologist that could kind of help you to kind of keep you on track. But looking up that to see if there's someone in your area who provides that is probably the best evidence for insomnia care. And then also just me online. I'm most present probably on Instagram as at the Wholehearted MD, and then I just started a Substack too, so you can find that on my website if you want to follow along for more sleep theology nerdiness.
Awesome. We're also going to have all of that in the description below, both here on YouTube and the descriptions on Apple and Spotify podcasts as well. So you'll be able to just take all of those links right there for whether it's to pick up his book or check him out on Instagram or any other places as well. Dr. Long, thank you very much for being with us. And I hope you get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, same to you, man. And again, thanks for the opportunity. This is a great conversation.
Absolutely. Everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in to the Valor Vision podcast. Again, it's always, let's have valor in our lives, which is courage in the face of adversity. And if sleep is the adversity, let's have courage to go after it, right? And so that we can go after the visions that God has given us. Take care. God bless. Have a good one. And there we go.